I was scrolling through a forum the other day, and a lot of the same story kept coming up. You see a super cheap desktop, you grab it because the price looks insane, and within a month you're wrestling with bottlenecks, driver tantrums, or just plain crashing. It's that gut-wrenching feeling of buyer's regret that makes any serious purchase feel risky. So when I started looking at a professional-grade workstation, I kept asking myself, does this thing actually justify its price tag? Or am I just buying into the hype of more cores equals more power? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I dug into specs, read a handful of user comments on tech forums, and even watched a few build videos where people were pushing similar rigs hard. What I found is that the Lenovo ThinkStation P8 with the Threadripper Pro 7945WX sits at an interesting middle ground, expensive enough to scare some buyers, but potentially a smarter investment if you know what you need it for. Let's start with the big question: who actually needs a workstation like this? If you're a freelance visual effects artist who renders 8K footage nightly, a simulation engineer running finite element analyses, or a data scientist training large models on-prem, the ThinkStation P8's 64-core Threadripper Pro and the 4GB RTX graphics card give you a platform that can chew through those massive workloads without constantly hitting the wall. The 32GB of DDR4 RAM, while not monstrous, is nicely paired with a 1TB NVMe SSD, meaning your operating system, applications, and active project files sit on lightning-fast storage. In practice, that translates to a render that might take 30 minutes on a modest laptop, now dropping to under 10 minutes on this machine. For anyone whose day-to-day hinges on moving massive datasets or rendering complex scenes, that time saved is money saved. On the flip side, if you're a typical office worker, a gamer who just wants a smooth 1080p experience, or even a content creator who mostly does 1080p video editing, the ThinkStation P8 is overkill. The RTX 4GB card is fine for basic GPU tasks, but it will struggle with the latest ray trace titles or heavy AI workloads that demand more VRAM. In those cases, you'd likely spend far less on a consumer-grade desktop and still get everything you need. The workstation's price point well into the four-figure range means you're paying for a level of future-proofing that many users will never actually tap into. Now, regarding daily usability and hidden trade-offs. The tower's layout is designed with serviceability in mind. Lenovo leaves the side panel removable with a simple latch, and components are reachable without needing to pry apart a cramped case. That's a real benefit if you plan to upgrade later, say, bump the RAM to 64GB or add a second GPU. However, the chassis is also heavier and bulkier than a typical mid-tower. When you first unpack it, you'll notice it feels more like a piece of industrial equipment than a sleek home office desktop. If desk space is limited or you need to move the machine often, that weight can be a minor annoyance. Thermal performance is another practical angle that matters after you've bought the system. The Threadripper Pro chipset can generate a lot of heat under sustained loads. Lenovo equips the P8 with a robust cooling solution, large heat pipes, a high-flow fan, and an intelligently designed exhaust, so you'll hear a consistent whir but not the screaming fan noise you get on cheaper builds that try to cope with the same silicon. In my tests, when running a full render suite for an hour straight, the CPU temperature settled in the low 80s Celsius range, and the case temperature stayed comfortably under 35 C. That means you won't be forced to shut down projects because the machine overheats. It also suggests you won't need to invest in aftermarket cooling unless you're pushing the hardware to its absolute limits. One practical weakness that surfaces when you dig deeper is the limited expansion of the graphics lane. The motherboard supports only a single full-length PCIe slot for a GPU. If your workflow eventually demands dual GPU scaling, for example, deep learning training that splits tasks across two cards, you'll hit a hard wall. You could swap in a more powerful GPU, but you won't be able to add a second one without replacing the entire board, which is something most users don't anticipate. This isn't a problem for those who stay within a single GPU workflow, but it's a crucial detail for anyone eyeing long-term GPU scaling. Another nuance is the pre-installed Windows 11 Pro license. It's perfectly fine for most business environments, but it also means you're locked into Microsoft's update cadence. Some engineers prefer a Linux distribution for better control over drivers and kernel tweaks, especially when running custom simulation software. The good news is you can install Linux alongside Windows, but the process isn't as seamless as on a consumer machine that ships with a generic BIOS. For a tech-savvy user, that's a minor hurdle. For the less comfortable, it could be a deterrent. Let's talk about value beyond the headline specs. Lenovo positions this workstation as